Have you ever seen those heartbreaking images from Sudan and wondered, how did it all come to this? Why is this nation, so rich in history and culture, trapped in a seemingly endless cycle of conflict? Today, we're going to peel back the layers and explore the deep-seated causes of the civil wars in Sudan. This isn't just a story about one country. It's a story about identity, power, resources, and the lasting scars of colonialism. To really understand what's happening now, we have to travel back in time. Long before Sudan was a single country, the region was home to a vast mosaic of different ethnic groups, languages, and religions. The north was predominantly Arab and Muslim, with deep connections to Egypt and the Middle East. The south, on the other hand, was home to a diverse array of African peoples who practiced traditional religions or Christianity. These weren't just geographical differences. They were fundamental differences in culture and identity. For centuries, these groups coexisted, traded, and sometimes clashed, but they were largely separate worlds. Then came the colonial era. In the late 19th century, Britain and Egypt established joint rule over the region, a system known as the Anglo-Egyptian condominium. But they didn't rule it as a unified whole. Instead, they implemented a divide-and-rule strategy. The British invested heavily in the north, building schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. They brought the northern Arab elites into the colonial administration, giving them experience in governance and power. The south, however, was treated very differently. It was deliberately isolated. The British administration restricted the movement of people and goods between north and south. They promoted English and Christianity, trying to create a cultural buffer against the Arabic and Islamic influence from the north. This policy effectively created two separate Sudans within one territory, sowing seeds of mistrust and resentment that would bear bitter fruit later on. The north looked down on the south as undeveloped, while the south saw the north as complicit in their marginalization. So, when Sudan prepared for independence in 1956, the stage was already set for disaster. The power was handed over almost exclusively to the northern elite who had been groomed for leadership. The southern Sudanese, who had been deliberately kept out of the political process, were left with virtually no voice in the new government. They feared that independence would just mean trading one colonial master for another, a British one for a northern Sudanese one. Their fears were quickly realized. The new government in Khartoum immediately began policies of Arabization, and Arabic was declared the official language, and Islamic law was pushed. Even in the non-Muslim south, southern civil servants were dismissed, and northern administrators were sent to replace them. For the south, this was a clear signal that their culture, their religion, and their very identity were under threat. This brings us to the First Sudanese Civil War, which actually began in 1955, a year before independence. It started with a mutiny by southern soldiers who feared being transferred to the north. The conflict lasted for 17 long years. It was a brutal war, fought over the fundamental question of Sudan's identity. Washitan Arab, Muslim nation, or a multicultural one? In 1972, the Addis Ababa Agreement brought a temporary halt to the fighting. It granted the South a degree of autonomy, a regional government, and recognition of its cultural diversity. For a moment, there was hope for peace, but that hope was short-lived. A decade later, the discovery of a massive resource changed everything. Oil. And where was most of this oil found? You guessed it, in the south. The central government in Khartoum, led by President Jofer Nimeri, wanted control of this newfound wealth. This economic incentive, combined with renewed ideological fervor, led to a series of disastrous decisions. In 1983, Nimeri tore up the Addis Ababa Agreement. He redrew the borders to place the oil fields under northern control, and, most provocatively, he imposed Islamic Sharia law across the entire country, including the non-Muslim south. This was the final straw. It was seen as the ultimate betrayal, a complete disregard for the South's autonomy and identity. The response was swift. The Sudan People's Liberation Army, or SPLA, was formed under the leadership of John Garang, and so began the Second Sudanese Civil War. This conflict was even longer and more devastating than the first, lasting for 22 years and causing the deaths of an estimated 2 million people. with millions more displaced. It was a war of immense brutality, marked by famine, mass displacement, and horrific human rights abuses on all sides. While the core conflict was between the North and the South, the reality was far more complex. The government in Khartoum often exploited local rivalries, arming different ethnic militias to fight against each other and against the This created a tangled web of conflicts within the broader civil war, making peace even harder to achieve. The issues were no longer just about religion and culture. They were about oil, power, land, and survival. After decades of fighting and immense international pressure, a breakthrough finally came. In 2005, the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, or CPA, was signed. This historic agreement did two main things. It re-established Southern autonomy and, crucially, it promised the South a referendum on independence after 6 years. In January 2011, that referendum was held. The result was overwhelming. Nearly 99% of South Sudanese voted to secede. On July 9, 2011, the Republic of South Sudan was born, becoming the world's newest nation. The international community celebrated, hoping that the separation would finally bring an end to Africa's longest civil war. But as we know now, the story doesn't end there. The separation created new problems. Key issues like the exact border demarcation, the sharing of oil revenues, since the South had the oil, but the North had the pipelines to export it, and the status of disputed regions like Abyei were left unresolved. And tragically, new conflicts have emerged. In Sudan, the government that lost the South continued to face rebellions in other marginalized regions like Darfur, South Kordofan, and Blue Nile. The same patterns of political and economic marginalization that fueled the North-South conflict were playing out elsewhere. Then, in 2019, a popular revolution toppled the longtime dictator Omar al-Bashir, bringing a glimmer of hope for a democratic transition. A power-sharing government was formed between civilian leaders and the military. However, this fragile alliance collapsed in 2023 when a brutal power struggle erupted between the two most powerful generals in the country, the head of the Sudanese Armed Forces and the head of the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. This new conflict has plunged the capital, Khartoum, and other regions like Darfur into a new humanitarian catastrophe. Meanwhile, South Sudan has faced its own tragic civil war since 2013, driven by a power struggle between its own leaders, which has fractured the new nation along ethnic lines. So, when we look at the causes of Sudan's civil wars, it's not one single thing. It's a toxic mix. It starts with the colonial legacy of divide and rule, which pitted North against South. It's fueled by post-independence governments that tried to impose a single Arab-Islamic identity on a diverse nation. It's intensified by the discovery of oil, which turned a conflict about identity into a war over resources. And it's perpetuated by a cycle of power struggles among elites who have consistently put their own interests above the well-being of their people. Understanding these deep roots is crucial. It shows us that peace isn't just about signing agreements or separating territories. It's about addressing the fundamental issues of injustice, inequality, and the need for a truly inclusive government that respects the diversity of all its citizens. The people of Sudan have suffered for far too long. Their story is a powerful, painful reminder of what happens when these fundamental issues are ignored. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video informative, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more deep dives into complex global issues. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time.